Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Jessica Wahl Turner. Jessica is the executive director of the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, also known as ORR, America's leading coalition of outdoor recreation trade associations and organizations. Currently, ORR is comprised of 31 national association members that serve more than 100,000 outdoor-related businesses, which is an amazing feat considering that the organization is less than 3 years old. Jessica and her team bring together all sectors of the outdoor economy to harness the industry's collective power and advance issues related to conservation, outdoor access, public lands infrastructure, and much more. Whether she's in the halls of Congress or in the wide open spaces of the American West, Jessica is a devoted, effective advocate for the outdoor industry. This conversation is part of the Montana Governor's Office of Outdoor Recreation's Business of the Outdoor Recreation Summit, a gathering of some of the most notable names in the outdoor recreation sector. Because of COVID, this year's summit has gone virtual, but the need for collaboration and idea sharing among industry experts has never been greater. The Outdoor Recreation Roundtable is a case study in focusing on common goals, putting aside petty differences, and overcoming challenges with new and innovative approaches. So I was thrilled to get a chance to learn exactly how Jessica has gone about leading this organization during these challenging times. Jessica and I connected on Zoom and had a fun, educational, and wide-ranging conversations about all aspects of the outdoor economy. We started by chatting about the history of ORR and exactly what the organization does. We also talked about the Great American Outdoors Act and how this landmark legislation will positively affect the outdoor industry. We talked about COVID's effect on the outdoor economy and how ORR is working to support outdoor businesses during these unprecedented times. We also talked about how the outdoor economy contributes to both rural and urban areas, as well as how all aspects of the outdoor economy are interconnected. We spent some time talking about Jessica's educational and professional backgrounds and what makes her so uniquely qualified for her current role. And as usual, we talk about favorite books, favorite outdoor adventures, and she offers some wise parting words. This was a great conversation, and I really hope you enjoy it. Be sure to check out the Business of Outdoor Recreation Summit webpage, as there are many resources, films, and other podcasts that you'll find enjoyable and educational. Links to everything are in the episode notes. Thanks a lot. Could you talk about the roundtable, maybe the history of the organization and exactly what you guys do?
Sure. So Outdoor Recreation Roundtable is actually a pretty new coalition founded only about 3 years ago now to bring together really all the disparate associations that circle in the outdoor recreation business space. So we have 32 national associations that are members of the roundtable now. Everything including Sports Industry America, Outdoor Industry Association, RV Industry Association. So really any and all of those big national groups that represent the 110,000 businesses that make up this sector, and covering the full breadth of outdoor recreation activities. So everything from scuba diving to horseback riding, off-roading to fishing, biking, hiking, pretty much the whole gamut of outdoor activities. And what we found a couple of years ago when the founders were kind of coming together, the CEOs of these trade associations, was they would have these informal conversations to talk about all of their unique trade shows and what their associations were doing at the conferences they were having. And, started talking about the impacts of trade and public lands and some crossover, more people that are climbing or sleeping in vans and RVs, and more people that are fishing are actually doing that off of kayaks, and realizing that we don't work together. Everyone's super siloed, and that's not actually how the consumers behave. So it's not helping consumer trends or behavior. When I go out, you might take your motorcycle to go hiking, or you might take your camper to go climbing, or you might take your skis on a weekend and then hop on a snowmobile. The consumer's kind of trying to collect, especially now, all of these experiences, the experiential economy, we call it, and we're not feeding into that. And similarly, another trend was happening that was pretty troublesome, which was that about 10 years ago, conservation and recreation made up about 2% of the discretionary federal budget. And now it's less than 1%. So we've actually been losing out on a huge amount of appropriations and a huge amount of support from the federal government for the things we care about. And we realized that's because we're not coming together in a unified way. We're not coming together for these big asks that other industries come together around. We're coming together and saying, the backcountry skiers, hey, we don't want snowmobilers here. And the snowmobilers, hey, we want a snowmobile here, but we don't want other things here. That's not really moving the needle. I mean, those trailhead battles, I call them, are important in communities, and it's important to have good management. There's places that are more suitable, for one form of recreation than another. But what do we all agree on? And so that's really what OR was formed on, and formed on the idea that we need to show up as the 778 billion economic driver that we are. And we weren't doing that when we show up as just the hikers or just the bikers. That's small subsets of this very, very big and important economy that really touches every corner of the country. And you can't speak to that or talk to that if you're not working with your colleagues, kind of across the associations. And so that was the formation of ORR 3 years ago. I think just maybe 7 or 8 associations originally, now 32. And with the main goal or priority really being that recreation becomes part of the national dialogue. And I think we've achieved some of that in 3 short years. So it's been really interesting and really, from my point of view, inspiring to see this work come together.
Yeah, it seems like there was just a niche there that was waiting to be filled, and you guys filled it. I mean, you hear reading in Outside or in, different publications, you hear about some of these, like you mentioned, the trailhead squabbles. Has it kind of been like a breath of fresh air for a lot of these different industry groups to come together and focus on the positive versus these little squabbles? Because I would guess, I'm not in the middle of it like you, but it seems that by a vast majority, there's so much more in common than there is different. And so how has that been for all these different groups who may have had a few differences here and there to really come together and not squabble and focus on these shared values? Have they appreciated that?
Yeah. I think, that's why they came together and said, let's form this in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably 99% of things that they all agree on, actually, like healthy public lands and waters, accessible public lands and waters, sustainable public lands and waters, fair trade, free trade, like really basic stuff. We all agree on it. And I think when the idea of ORR started to form, everyone was thinking, all right, now we've got this pie and we're fighting over our slices. So like if I use this trail, you can't, or you're hurting my trail usage if you're out there at the same time. And what ORR can do is actually make the pie bigger, right? Yeah. It doesn't have to be a trailhead battle at that one trail. Let's have more trails. Let's have better management. Let's have more tools. Let's use GIS data so we know when people are on the trail or when it's busy. And so I think that's one piece, is making the pie bigger instead of fighting over the slices, which is something that I've always worked on in kind of all of my jobs, and really can see it, I think, happen the most tangible here. And I think the other piece is, not to put it totally on the user community, but the business community, which is really where ORR rests, isn't the community that's involved in those fights. Those are local, and those are really the users. Yeah. And so can the business community do our job to, help advocate for the best management and the best places and the best funding, and so that the user community member maybe has an easier job on the ground, understanding where they can go, and if they can't go somewhere, why, and understanding other usages. And as, again, people change from, I think, what was maybe a decade or 2 decades ago, you're a climber and that's your thing. You're a dirtbag climber and you climb all day and all night and your whole garage is climbing gear. Mm-hmm. Or you're a Harley Davidson guy and you're head to toe Harley Davidson, and that's what your dog has the vest, and that's all you do, and you bike. those aren't the recreationists we're seeing now. We're seeing someone that maybe, like I said before, works at Patagonia, like my friends, has a motorcycle so they can get to Joshua Tree quicker through the LA traffic on the weekends to camp and hike. And so they're doing and then they bring their dirt bike sometimes, right? So they're doing all these different things and they don't want to be defined or siloed. And that's really where I think the business community can do a much better job of saying, we're actually here for all of your recreation pursuits. We're the vehicle for that, or try this. Or have you thought about when you're in Moab, not just doing arches, but taking a trip, taking a paddling trip or a horseback trip. And that delineates a little bit, I think, ORR from the user community battles, which are hyper local and very much, people feeling passionate about their activities, as opposed to the business perspective, which is that, we'd really like more people out there. So there's more product and more opportunity.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And I'm always inspired by groups like yours that are able to focus on the positive, because I think we need that now more than ever. When you're there in DC in the midst of it daily, and so I would guess that a lot of people are jealous of your job that you get get to focus on positive most of the day. One thing that has come up a lot on this podcast, kind of almost like a play-by-play, was the Great American Outdoors Act.
Yeah.
And I had people on the podcast and we were talking about it kind of as it was making its way through. And then I think I had somebody on right after it had passed. And so now that has passed, the dust is settled. Everybody knows what we're working with. How do you see that from your perspective in your job? How is that gonna affect the outdoor industry and all the different partners that you work with?
Well, so it's interesting that you mentioned that, because actually access and infrastructure are sort of the foundational pieces. It's funding, access, and infrastructure for ORR. Those are those are the main areas we work on as a whole for the outdoor recreation economy. And so access and infrastructure are basically the bottom line of what GAOA does through the Land and Water Conservation Program and the Deferred Maintenance Backlog Program. So we came together around 3 years ago and have been highlighting this deferred maintenance issue on all of our public lands, as well as the LWCF issue. And it's been pretty amazing to see such a big bill like this come around when we're only 3 years in, and our testimony was used. I testified twice. Many other members testified. We had a letter that was read on the Senate floor from all of our businesses. I think we had 150 cross-sector businesses from, every corner of the industry saying this is the most important recreation bill. We worked members of Congress. I think the House vote was a lot bigger and better because of some of our motorcycle and off-road friends that got some Midwestern and Southeastern members that no one had expected. And so worked that bill really hard. It was core to most of our association's advocacy work. And most importantly, the bill only incorporated the Park Service at first. Yeah. And so we were instrumental in moving that so that the Forest Service, BLM, and Fish were included because, to be frank, a lot more recreation probably happens on those public lands, than Park Service actually. So huge win there. I think what a lot of groups can do now, for better or for worse, is pat themselves on the back and walk away and know that the funding's there and things are going smoothly and, everything's great. The biggest investment in conservation and recreation in 50 years. We don't have that liberty. So we've actually been more involved even maybe on the back end than we were on the advocacy piece, because we're really interested in what those projects are, where those projects are, what type of recreation assets they're supporting. Are they supporting the whole recreation experience, or are they fixing a watershed in an area that still has a road problem? So we've been talking to the agencies daily, working with them on their implementation, on their project list. And, what I see is, I think there's several things. I think if we can get the deferred maintenance right, we've talked to the Forest Service about this at length, they can actually tackle the entire recreation maintenance backlog in 5 years and still do the other things they need to do on roads and bridges and buildings. If, they're smart about ROI, if they utilize youth cores, if they utilize partnerships, if they think about, the holistic system instead of the sum of its parts. So that's been pretty awesome to have that data, to kind of dig into those numbers, and then to sort of have something to hold agencies accountable and say, here's the opportunity, let's meet this opportunity. And then maybe in 5 years, we have a reauthorization of the program. And that would be, I think a realistic, certainly a reach, but a realistic goal that in 5 years, can we get, another 5 years of deferred maintenance funding? I think on the LWCF side, we've never played in this world before as a recreation community, because we've always been, in all of my roles, fighting for reauthorization or full funding.
Yeah.
Now that we have both, we can actually talk about the projects. And I think that's super exciting for rural communities across the country to think about what an LWCF project might do to their economic growth. I think it's really fascinating with COVID and everything that's happened in urban communities who don't have access to parks or trails or public lands or fishing holes or whatever it is, to think about what LWCF projects could provide that access now when they need it more than ever. So we're on that train. It's left the station. We're asking for project proposals from businesses across the country and their partners, and we're going to package them up and work with Congress and administration to make sure that we get more projects that are not just these big, great conservation projects, because they are, and they all help recreation, in some way or another. But what can we do really strategically now that we're getting double the funding in this program around rural development and access and inequity around public lands? And I think, in 5 years, we might have some really, really good examples of places that didn't have access before that have it now, didn't have an urban park, have it now, or didn't have, recreation as a rural economic driver and have it now. So I think that's the future of this program and this funding. And the biggest change for us will be to, have the recreation business community as a real part of deciding and helping to introduce those types of projects to the forefront of the list. And it's just not something we've been engaged in before. So it's super exciting.
So you obviously got a lot of irons in the fire. I mean, you're going full speed on this, but when you think about, when you're planning out where you're going to take this, obviously we got an election coming up in a month, and do you have kind of a plan A and a plan B, or a fork in the road depending on which candidate wins or which party wins, or is your plan kind of bipartisan and you're going to be able to execute no matter what? I mean, I guess the better way of asking is, how is this election going to affect what you're working on right now?
Yeah, it's bipartisan. It's I think your last point, it shouldn't impact where we're heading and how we're getting there. Obviously, if there's changes in administration and different people and getting them up to speed, and they might have different tactics. But the goal here, especially for ORR, just as an entity in the way it's set up, is that it shouldn't matter who's, in control of the Senate or the House or the White House, that recreation is a priority and recreation is important, and it's, supported. And I think if you have a different strategy for, election outcomes, you're kind of banking on one party maybe being more friendly to it than the other, or getting better perks with another party. And we just don't want the whims of politics to impact, how many dollars public lands get or if they're protected. So really making this a bipartisan, taking the GAOA success and saying this could be a success every year. We could have a great public lands package or a great recreation package. And anyone can be a champion of public lands and, climate. I mean, Nixon, right, did the Clean Air Act.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting when you look back at the history on some of the biggest, most important clean air and clean water bills that were passed. So I just think you can't write anyone off or any administration off. We've been talking to both campaigns. Both campaigns are really interested and open to our agenda, I think probably for different reasons and focus on different aspects. One of the, I think, disappointing probably things is that neither a Trump second term nor a Biden presidential nomination will result in better trade issues that we've been having. So, I mean, I think there's some things where everyone can embrace and get, especially around Made in America. I mean, when we talk to the campaigns about how many jobs, 95% of the boats sold in the U.S. are made here. 98% of the RVs sold are made here. These are in Elkhart, Indiana, and in the middle of nowhere, South Carolina. And I mean, these are important states for people campaigning, Michigan and Wisconsin. But really, these are real big American jobs in manufacturing that are not going to be pushed overseas. And if we can, elevate this industry as a whole, we can elevate these kinds of jobs. And they really grab onto that, this kind of made in America sector that supports such an American an American heritage, which
Sure.
is the outdoors. So I think we're set up for success.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me, when we were talking a few weeks ago on the phone, kind of getting ready for this, you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it this way, but you talked about kind of the balance and how different parts of the country have different contributions to the outdoor recreation industry. And so, this podcast is obviously focused on the West. I live in the West. This podcast is in partnership with the Montana Outdoor Recreation Office. And, out here is where people, like you said, gather these experiences and they enjoy the outdoors. But none of this would be possible without the manufacturing and the business side of things. For example, like with RVs, they're being manufactured in Middle America.
Right.
And can you talk a little bit about that kind of balance between the two, and how the rural areas of Montana and Colorado and Wyoming wouldn't work without the blue collar manufacturing regions of the country, and kind of how they work together towards this common goal?
Yeah, and I think the best way of describing that is really using the data that the Bureau of Economic Analysis now has on the outdoor recreation industry. That's been so valuable for so many reasons, to, for the first time, have government counting us as a unique sector of the economy, and then, data that we can unpack and compare apples to other industries. I mean, that's put us on the map, right? And also, OR has been instrumental in keeping that data coming annually and making sure it's really reflective of our sectors. But when you look at the state recreation economies in that data, every state has a recreation economy, which is awesome. And we knew that. But you're able to drill down and see, what is it driving that recreation economy? And if you look at Montana, you would not be surprised that it's trips and travel and the park visitation and guides and outfitters. And I mean, it's all the things that you see every day and that you would go to Montana for. Well, DC has a recreation economy, Washington, DC, and it's based around food and beverage and conferences. Think about all, and the federal workforce that, are in all the headquarters of all these agencies. So DC's recreation economy is really important. It's a significant percentage of the GDP. You would just never even think of that. And then when you think about these states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Iowa and Indiana are two, amongst the top 10 state recreation economies. And you think, who's going to Iowa and Indiana and what are they doing there? They're building the products there. And so it's all manufacturing there. So what's so interesting is, yes, every state has its own recreation economy, but with this data, we can actually tell you what it is that's the driving factor. In Colorado, it's not so much manufacturing, right? But in South Carolina and Florida, there is, there's manufacturing there too. We're also able to look, is it boating and fishing, or is it hunting and biking? And so the data has just been awesome to have, and it's validating too. And we're hoping to get even more granular and regional, because sometimes I'll go to a Seattle congressperson and I'll say, here's the Washington numbers, or sorry, I'll go to Washington congressperson and I'll say, here's the Washington numbers. Here's how big, recreation is in Washington. And they'll say, well, that's Seattle. That's the Western, part of the state. That's not us.
Yeah.
And I can actually show the data and say, yeah, no, you have a recreation economy. It's different. It's not mountaineering, right?
Yeah.
But it's hunting and fishing, and it's significant. So it's important that we don't, write any piece of the puzzle off as not being recreation. I think it's also important to know where states, are focused, and making sure we help with that focus, right? So manufacturing practices are incredibly important in Indiana. They were hurting very bad, right, when manufacturing had to shut down for a couple of months because of COVID. But Montana was hurting really bad because people weren't coming to the parks. So, we can use this data, I think, to help elevate things that are working well, and also to continue to diversify recreation economies. And thinking about Arkansas, thinking about Walmart and how they built one of the best mountain biking trails in the country to attract and retain workforce is just incredible. I mean, in the middle of Arkansas, you have a world-class IMBA trail because that's what they felt Walmart employees wanted. And so they invested in it. So now Arkansas has this booming, biking recreation economy.
Yeah.
And I love seeing that. And I love hearing that. And I love that communities are being smart and thoughtful about how they're making those investments. And with a great bike trail comes maybe an REI. And with an REI comes maybe a small brand manufacturer who wants to, make the product next to a big retailer. And so it's amazing what, just a trail can do to a community to actually expand the recreation economy in so many different areas.
Yeah. And I think that leads into more current events, but obviously all this trail work and the understanding the data and celebrating the different parts of the outdoor industry, that's been going on for a while. But I think in the last 7 months, thanks to COVID, it's become a lot more important. Like that mountain bike trail you mentioned in Arkansas is probably getting a lot more use than it was this time last year, because people are really flocking to the outdoors as a way to deal with COVID. And so can you talk a little bit about how COVID has maybe affected your job, and then how it's affected the outdoor industry at large? Because it seems like some businesses, like bike shops, are just making money hand over fist, can't keep bikes in stock. And then others, like some manufacturers, are having issues. So how has this worked out in your world?
So I think it's important to frame what's going on in just with two key pieces. One being that the spring was incredibly difficult for the industry, and the summer months have been a lot better for some of the reasons that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
But I think the second piece, and really the overlying piece, is that just like any other business, sector, industry, we need certainty. And there's really no certainty. And so even though for the bike shop example, bike sales were, I think, 81% over last year in the months of May and June. I mean, just really insane. Product is gone. That's not necessarily a good thing, right? Because if they're running out of product, that means that when people want to buy product in the fall months and they want to get a bike, or in our case, we're trying to get a bike rack, our local bike shop doesn't have any. So they're actually losing those customers now because of product problems and distribution problems. So I think those are kind of the framing pieces. I would say April, May were so gloomy for the industry. We actually started surveying the industry. And before our survey came out, the Census Bureau ranked outdoor recreation is the second most impacted industry, right under food and accommodation. And if you think about it, outdoor recreation also has a strong link to food and accommodation, because a lot of those communities that rely on outdoor recreation, are tourism communities. So we were hit, I would say from every direction, with entire supply chains disrupted, from the components coming overseas or not coming overseas, all the way to manufacturing stalling, distribution stalling. And then the backbone of our industry, public lands and waters, state lands and waters, were closed for the most part, or in a lot of places, people were told not to go there. So they're shuttered. And then our retail doors are shuttered, and service providers obviously can't do their jobs. So it's every component of the sector was having, probably their darkest days earlier this spring. And we saw 88% of businesses, in our big ecosystem of businesses, laid off or furloughed their employees. 94% saw a decrease in revenue, but 80% that was significant. And almost 100% of businesses said that they had supply chain and distribution problems. Mm-hmm. So every business is impacted, many of them severely impacted. At the same time, what's happening when you look out your window is everyone's getting outside. And Outdoor Foundation runs a participation study every year. Less than 50% of Americans get outside, usually on an annual basis. So less than 50% of Americans have an outdoor experience. As of June, 81% of Americans said that they had an outdoor experience this year. Wow. So you're looking at like 30% increase, all new users. And that was really interesting as they started to turn to recreation for the first time. And as we were able to kind of bring our parks back online and retailers back online, what we saw was everyone camping, RVs flying off the shelf, boats flying off the shelf, fish and tackle, can't keep anything on the shelves, bike, as you mentioned. and RV power sports. I mean, everything was through the roof, all-time record highs. Fishing licenses were up 100% in some states. I mean, just crazy how many people are actually not just buying the gear and equipment, but actually, doing these things and then saying they want to continue these things after the pandemic. So I'd say we're in this really interesting space of recognizing that the pandemic has unleashed a demand for and maybe appreciation of the outdoors that this industry has been seeking from the American public for over probably a decade, right? Or more. They've been trying to get new users, diverse users. How do we get new people into the RV world? Well, pretty much everyone buying an RV right now is, under the age of 40, and a lot of, much more diverse communities getting into these things. So we are excited about the opportunities ahead to really harness that appreciation and love for the outdoors. And also, I think, nervous about what could happen with continued distribution problems, or if there's another sort of shutdown cycle to our parks or our manufacturers. So it's a little bit of a embrace what's happening today, and let's plan for perhaps a tomorrow that's not as sunny. And that's kind of the picture that we've been hearing about, and we continue to survey about. All in all, we've fared a lot better than I think many would have thought, and really are excited about the link between the health benefits that Americans are finding, time outdoors, quality of life, family, safety. And we hope that those are the trends that continue even after the pandemic.
I feel like it's definitely a good thing that more people are getting outdoors, because I've always thought that in order to want to protect something, you have to love it. And the only way to love it is to experience it. And so the more people that can get outdoors, the better. But I guess the downside is it's overwhelming some of these trailheads and overwhelming some of these open spaces. And like anything, there's give and take. But how are you and your members and your partners, how are y'all thinking about kind of conservation on one side with the desire to increase usage of these places? I mean, what do you and your partners think about when you're trying to consider, right, how do we protect these places as well? I mean, we want people to use them, but we don't want them to be loved to death. So what's the thought process when y'all are trying to figure that equation out?
Well, and it all comes down to sustainable recreation, and like I said, good management. If we have good management plans from the beginning, if the agencies, whether they're local, state, or federal, know what the impact is of the activity on the land and kind of know those thresholds and are clear about that, those are things we can really get on board with and help support. It does come down to the user community, a lot of it being respectful. Like, you can buy whatever you want from a retailer and they can give you guidance, but when push comes to shove, what are you actually doing on the land? So I think we've seen a lot more business interest in things like recreate responsibly, getting information out about how to camp, especially with first-time users, where you camp, leave no trace ethics, even trail etiquette. I mean, there's some things I learned just recently about, if there's a horse, a biker, and a trail runner, who comes first, or what's the protocol. So I think just, we're in constant learning mode, but the business community has definitely over the past 6 months stepped up more to talk about conservation ethics and really just ways to keep these places open and open for, people's enjoyment, but also for us, open for business. So the worst case scenario, right, would have been all the parks opening back up, everything opening back up, people buying product, and then everything being shut down again because of, how the users were using the area, or if there was a huge COVID outbreak. So I think we're really cautious about that and having a much bigger role to play. But it does come down to the individual users. It comes down to the community or the space that they're in being a friendly space to have these conversations and education space.
Yeah.
And, I think it comes down to having more access. When governors said, stay close to home, stay within 10 miles of your house, and in the same breath said, get outside, get fresh air, vitamin D is good, outdoors it's less, transmittable. You're kind of telling people to do something that probably half of all Americans can't do. They can't stay local and get on a trail.
Yeah.
So we need to make that a reality. We need to make it a reality that someone could stay near their home and still have a great outdoor experience. And I think that's where things like LWCF and GAOA really come into play. So it's how do we take care of what we have now? How do we better understand it and management? And how do we add, new opportunities in places that don't have access? So not everyone's flocking to the same trailhead, that's an hour or two away on the weekend. And we can really start to pull back some of those usage problems that have been happening and certainly rampant during the virus. I think one of the big issues beyond just, conservation trail usage is the team from the Park Service or from your local Fish and Wildlife agency, just exhaustion and overwhelmed staff.
Mm-hmm.
And we're really thinking about them and the agency's budgets and sort of their real lack of resources able to help accommodate their workforce during this time. And so looking at a big workforce strain and drain in the federal agencies and thinking about how we can support there.
No, that all makes perfect sense. And I bet it's pretty inspiring having so many smart people at the table trying to come up with solutions for these kind of things. Cause again, I keep saying this, but who would have ever guessed in January that we'd be where we are now? And that takes me to my next question. What are your goals as the leader of the organization? What are your goals? Like when you think about 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now, I mean, how would you, looking back, or looking forward, what would you need to happen to be like, all right, we've been successful. We've done what we needed to do. And maybe your answer is different now than it would have been if I'd asked you that in January. But what do you think about the future for the roundtable?
Yeah, well, I think there's been, success already just in the fact that we've come together. I think that was success.
Oh yeah, that's huge. That's the hard part.
We can keep this thing together. I'm like, okay, keeping a coalition functioning is like maybe, sounds like a low-hanging fruit, but it's a lot of work. So
I can't imagine.
And GAOA and that stuff, huge. But really where I think that we've moved the needle or shaped the future of recreation in a way that's really impactful and unique is if other agencies and other entities and other, kind of beyond our ecosystem. I mean, when I first started working in this space, it was DOI and USDA. Mm-hmm. And not even USDA, maybe just Forest Service. Like, you just talk to the Forest Service and the Department of Interior agencies, and that was the whole ecosystem. And in the Senate, it was Natural Resources Committee, and in the House, it was Natural Resources Committee. Well, we started to broaden that. We had a whole business committee hearing on the impacts of COVID. We had a whole, agriculture hearing on rural communities and recreation. Impacts of COVID to recreation in the business committee and that. And, so we're starting to reach out and reach out. And I think it's really important that labor is talking about recreation workforce, that HUD, Housing and Urban Development is talking about incorporating recreation into urban communities and landscapes, that transportation is talking about how you get to the trails, that, and you go down the list. And I think that's where we've reached a new pinnacle of success, that it's not just two agencies and two committees thinking about us and working with us, but it's really almost across every federal agency. What if education was thinking about STEM and outdoor learning? And you can go out. What if health, HHS was incorporating outdoor guidelines into, how you live a healthy life and into clinical trials. So that's where I'm excited. And I think that's where, one of my probably personal goals for the industry at large is that we're not just a nice to have outdoor weekend, public lands, conservation thing. We are really driving, economies. We are employing Americans. We are a health asset. We're a financial asset to communities. And how does that all wrap up and tie in? And how can we be working with just more people who haven't heard these stories before and haven't thought of us in that way? And so I think that's the potential. And that's where ORR can, just do so much cool work. We had 8 hearings on recreation economy this year alone in the past year. I think in my whole work career, there's maybe been 1 or maybe 2 and all in natural resources and not even just on recreation. Usually in conservation, there'd be a recreation witness. Yeah. So we're starting to see that happen and to get calls from the small business committee every, week. How's your industry doing? What are they doing? What do they need? It's pretty cool. That's a really cool space to be in. So I just want to keep expanding that and making room for us in many, many other conversations.
Well, I'd love to talk about your background because you've referenced a few things from your career, and it seems like you're just uniquely qualified for this role that you're in now, after a lot of hard work and a lot of great experience. So, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I was snooping on LinkedIn. You went to Georgetown,
Yep.
undergrad, grad, and then you pretty almost immediately after that got into this world that you're in now, into the I guess I don't know if you call it lobbying or advocacy or outdoor policy. And had you always wanted to do that? I mean, when you went to Georgetown, was that your goal? Like, I want to be involved in government in some way? Because I just when I was in college, I wasn't really thinking about about that. But it seems like you've got a plan.
Yeah. I definitely wanted to be involved in government. Was thinking more law school and more in education. I was fascinated by education and kind of education inequities in the public school system. And so track was not outdoor. I don't even think I knew this existed, this world of jobs and careers. And really got into environmental policy, and then was like, I want to be an environmental lawyer, and then realized what the LSATs took. and being kind of loving school, but hating reading large textbooks, I decided to roll into a master's program in American government, where I just fell in love with the process and the history and the complexities of the system, and got really deeper into environmental work, especially around clean energy, and was linked up with DOI for my practicum in my master's program with Bureau of Land Management to look at renewable wind and hydro subsidies, and kind of fell into a role the same day that the administration was changing. So it was the president's first day and Secretary Salazar's first day, my first day as a low little intern. And that worked out really well because a lot of political appointees take months to come on board.
Sure.
So they're kind of scrapping at the bottom probably of the intern pool, trying to figure out who can we get up here in the secretary's office to, just start the work that it takes to transition administration. And so I was called up there for a week detail to help them. And then I never left. They said, we're going to find a role for you here. And I had several different roles in the secretary's office over the 4 years that were so valuable, so interesting. I never got into renewable energy development. My practicum was horrible because I had to write it on the side without having any experience with the Bureau of Land Management or renewable energy. But it brought me into this whole new world of what the agencies at DOI do and how much land there is and how complicated management is and how many partners and people and, just things are integrated into this huge public land management system. And it was fascinating and kind of, launched my career trajectory from there, working on a ton of stuff with them and youth and the outdoors and the Deepwater Horizon and the Let's Move program that opened my eyes to all the great opportunities there are in the recreation kind of side of the world. So that was a really lucky timing, I think, for me. Otherwise, I'd be on a wind farm or something right now, which wouldn't be that bad. That sounds kind of nice these days with everything going on in politics, but certainly didn't think I'd be landing here.
Well, that's the common theme of people have on this podcast is they all talk about how lucky they are. And I'm like, well, you're humble. You're not lucky because you made it happen with a lot of extreme hard work. So you left Interior and moved over to the Outdoor Industry Association. Is that correct?
Yep.
And so,
became a lobbyist for them.
Okay. And so can you talk about what you did with them? Because I think most people that listen to this are familiar with the Outdoor Industry Association, at least see their logo on things. But can you talk about maybe what that organization did and what you did for them and any lessons you learned there?
Yeah, I was their first full-time recreation, I think the industry's maybe first full-time recreation lobbyist in DC, working in recreation and conservation, kind of running the DC office on those issues. So for 4 years, it was everything from monuments and wilderness to funding. We did get that study across, we written and passed to study the outdoor recreation economy, the BEA study that I've referenced, those $778 billion industry. All those numbers come from this pretty groundbreaking study that we got passed when I was there. So it was really awesome to get on the business side of things when my past 4 years had been so much on the public sector side.
Yep.
And to really dig into where the business is connected with what was good for the public and how they activated around that, and just got to work with some amazing people. I mean, there's just, I think, the most passionate and kind and thoughtful and smart people in this industry, and really fell in love with, I think, every piece of it. I loved that recreation finally had a voice on the Hill, and that, I could meet with staffers at the climbing gym or on the trail, really live kind of that authentic life of being both a policy wonk that would sit and read over bills until 1 a.m. in the morning to make sure they were good for us. But also I liked that I could be someone that I think the Hill really saw as living and breathing the outdoor lifestyle as much as you can in DC. It's very different in the East Coast, but so it was a wonderful experience. And really what I found was interesting was when I first started, I feel like there was a lot of maybe questionable, I think people were not ready for a lobbyist in this industry. Mm-hmm. Even maybe what was this 8 years ago now, they were very skeptical. We don't need to be, we're this cool industry. We don't need lobbyists. We don't want to sell our soul. We don't want to give all this money to Congress, And I think it was really fun to be part of the switch where we saw ourselves as something that was so different from other industries, to where we saw ourselves as, still unique and super, values-based. And you can still have all these things. You can still play the game.
Yeah.
And you have to, or else everyone else, Sally, Jules said this, and Salazar said this, all of the mentors I've worked with. But if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So you got to step up. You got to be at the table. And it's true. In every conversation, every time I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to this meeting, but I'll go, and just so recreation can show up, I realized there was something on that menu that would have been bad for us, or maybe we, didn't even include us. Yeah. And so you've got to have someone in these conversations. And maybe the way DC works is super flawed, and it's not a perfect system, and people don't like to be involved because it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. But that's where I could step and be like, I'll do it. Okay. You guys don't have to come. I will, I'll do that work. And it was really important. It was awesome to bring companies in for the first time and see them lobby on the Hill and feel like they had a voice and kind of, get votes or, get co-sponsors for bills. So really good experience in an industry that probably wasn't ready for someone like me, or, for the role that I had, into now where it's like, how, every brand wants their own lobbyist now. And there's several, lobbyists running around, and people have firms that they pay to lobby for them. So that's been a cool transition to see.
Well, you're obviously really good at that. And so say a young, maybe 25-year-old man or woman came to you and they're like, I want to do what you do. I want to do what you do. I want to be a lobbyist. What advice would you give them? I mean, and so what I'm really getting at here, but you're too humble to just answer it, is what is your secret to success? But since you probably wouldn't answer that, how would you advise?
Yeah, like the first question.
How would you advise a young wannabe lobbyist to do what you do?
I think you have to have experience on the other side. I actually interned on the Hill in undergrad. Mm-hmm. So had that Hill experience, working for a congressman, and then obviously had the experience at DOI. I just think you have to sit in that seat for a little bit, whether it's a week or, whether you're working on a campaign. Sometimes that gives you the same kind of background to see what they're looking for. What are they hearing? What are they talking about in the office? How are they responding to emails? What things rise to the top where they alert their boss about? Those things are really important. And then what does a good meeting look like? You would walk away from some meetings in my roles for the government and be like, man, I don't understand what they wanted, or they weren't prepared, or I feel like I can't help them. And so having that, just what a good meeting looks like, what makes me feel good, after a meeting, and wanting to work with this group really helps. And then, I think this goes back to something I mentioned earlier, just not writing anyone off. There's not a single congressperson, and I still believe this to this day, although it's getting harder but I don't think there's a single congressperson that can't work on something for the recreation economy that's helpful.
Yeah.
And, it might not all be monuments and wilderness. It might be trade. It might be transportation and infrastructure. I mean, it might just be, can we get the Bureau of Economic Labor stats because they want them for their state? And that's important because we need to keep funding that. So one of the things that I've always come to the table with meetings is knowing that they might not agree on that one thing that I'm coming in for, but can we find something else to work on? And that's opened so many doors to like cool projects about Veterans Affairs and really great projects about training horses and, for people with disabilities, but doing it in the outdoors. And so you just never know what's going to come out. So I think making sure that your goal for the meeting isn't always to get exactly what you want. But there's a broader goal for the relationship is that at some point we're going to work together on something and finding that sweet spot. And so I think coming in with preconceived notions or being super, not even just partisan, but kind of assuming things, these staffers are people, these members of Congress are people, and there's a lot of different ways to, I think, have success on the Hill. And some of it is, I find staffers in offices that are terrible on our issues who love the outdoors and just develop a relationship with them. And then when the push comes to shove, sometimes they come through, because the staffer matters just as much as the boss. So I think there's a lot of just personal relationships. Everyone's human. No one's trying to be evil or bad. And I don't think you see that when you're not on the Hill or in the environment, but like people get along. It's not that partisan. A lot of it is media and everything. But I mean, I was staffers, we'll meet with Schumer's staffer and McConnell staffer in the same room all the time talking about things together that we can work on. So I just think it's a little bit different when you're in the middle of it. You have to be so much more flexible and compromising than it probably appears from, watching the news.
Oh yeah, no, I can attest to that because I've gone to DC to do some advocacy work for the conservation world, and initially before I'd ever been, and I was getting ready for the trip, I thought it was going to be a waste of time. I mean, and I hate to say that, but I was like, this is, these people aren't going to listen. They don't care. And after I spent 3 or 4 days there, and I left super inspired. Like every single person I met.
Everyone has that experience, right?
Yeah. And I was in Gardner's office and I was in Bennett's office and I was across the full spectrum. And I was so inspired by, the actual senators and the representatives, but also their staffs. It was a great experience that very quickly changed my whole perspective on this. And so I was a skeptic and I was turned. So I really appreciate what y'all do up there. You've mentioned Salazar, you mentioned Sally Jewell. Are there any who else are mentors or even people you admire that have shaped your career? And you don't particularly have to know them. I mean, it could be a historical figure, but are there people that come to mind that you're like, man, I really admire that person. I want to be like them.
Yeah, I think Salazar, because he brought people together and was, he always had Republicans coming in and he brought people together around the oil spill, all the oil and gas CEOs to fix the spill. And even though, it was horrible and, oh my gosh, just terrible what was happening in the Gulf, he could see that we needed everyone at the table. And so, we needed the same oil and gas companies that maybe would be blamed for it to come to the table and feel like they could be part of the solution. And I really appreciated his moderate, thoughtful, bring everyone in to the pie. This is the only way we're going to get things done. So I think he remains just someone I look up to his approach very much. But I think, in the outdoor industry, Ann Kirchick was a senior vice president of the North Face when I started. And the first thing I had to do was set up a recreation advisory council. And so again, here's someone in a role that a lot of people don't even want from DC in a suit at Outdoor Retailer, just totally. And I don't even know why she did it. It's just, she was the chair. We just, we had her be the chair because of her role and her authority, and everyone knew her in the industry and loved her. And she decided she was going to take me under her wing, and that I was super green. she was going to introduce me to the right people. And if anyone was like, what's going on here? She was going to like give this girl a chance, give this role a chance. And it probably set me up for success more than anything else, because she would be the ones talking to CEOs of other companies saying, you've got to join this RAC. It's really important. We've got this representation in DC now. We need our voices heard. And I could have never, gotten Keen and Patagonia and REI and all these huge companies, to join my advisory council if it weren't for someone like her, pushing and advocating. And she did it. She actually passed a couple of years ago, which was a really sad day for the industry, a huge loss. But she was one of the founders of Camber Outdoors, the Women's Coalition, which was OWAG. I forgot their. So she did so much to support athletes and especially young people, and she just didn't have to do it. And I think I always look back and I'm like, what's the impetus, or what was she getting out of that? And I just think she played that role very well, a very motherly mentor role in the industry. And there's not many people that will stop their day to spend that kind of time. And then it shaped my whole career, right? With the way I was set up for success, I knew all the CEOs in 2 weeks because of her and had their respect. And so I just think I learned a lot about not taking for granted your positional power, and the opportunity to help people that are either coming in new or younger. Because what do you have to lose? And if anything, she probably gained a lot out of her relationship too, because I ended up, working hard in DC for a lot of the things that North Face cared about. And we ended up being very, very good friends. So I just really respected that. And I think that's not unique to the industry, but I think every industry, I hope, has people like Anne that welcomes newcomers and encourages others to kind of give new ideas a chance.
That's great. That's inspiring to hear too, because it's kind of the crossroads of politics and business, big politics and big business, which have the reputation sometimes of being cutthroat. And so the fact that you've got these stories of these just kind people that are really trying to help. I mean, this conversation is well timed, because I think I spent too much time this weekend looking at the news. And I was down in the dumps, and now I'm all now I'm back positive and happy. So thank you.
Good. Even to DC girl to do that.
Yeah, who would have ever guessed that the Colorado guy would be downtrodden in the DC?
Yeah,
hear me up.
Exactly.
Well, we're coming up on an hour, which went really fast. But I've got a few quick questions that I like to run through with everybody at the end. Can we run through those? Then I'll let you get back to it.
Sure thing.
I read a ton of books, kind of probably too many books. It's kind of weird how many books I read, but I'm always asking people for recommendations. And so I would love to hear any books that have been important to your career, whether it's about the outdoor world and adventure or the West, or whether it's leadership books. I mean, just what books do you look back at and you're like, this really shaped my career or my life?
Well, I don't like to read, as I mentioned.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned that.
I don't like to read books. I read the New York Times front to back every day.
That's better than me.
I get the newspaper. I get the hard copy still. I'm supporting the print newspaper industry still. But that being said, I try very hard. But I read a bunch of books in grad school, and a couple of them shaped, I think, just the career. And I think back on them, and I try to look back and read them again. Young Men in Fire by Norman MacLean.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, Man Gulch Fire. My fascinating piece on that, and this was, again, before I thought I was going to have a career in outdoors. This was totally just a reading on leadership. And it was more about leadership styles and kind of what led to, or certainly didn't help, the situation. And 13 men ended up dying in this fire crew. I just felt like that was so interesting on hierarchy and decision-making processes in crisis situations.
Sure.
And then now it's more relevant than ever, because it's about fire patterns and movement and, how fires can jump and things like that. So super relevant and awesome history read. And then on the policy side, Bowling Alone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've not read it, but I've heard great things.
It's long and it's wonky, and I just go back to it, and it was so right. And it's like 25 years old or 30 years old. And it's just it knew everything that was going to happen, kind of the deconstruction of civil society in a way that we don't see our neighbors as neighbors. We see it as us and them. And of course, all around the fact that bowling leagues went away, which is, sort of a metaphor for a lot of other things, but that we don't know our neighbors and we don't have anything in common with them. So what we have that's uncommon or not, that we don't share, becomes our how we see each other, as opposed to, oh, I had book club with them last weekend and they're great people and politics is different, but I can see where they're coming from because their kid is, in the Air Force or whatever.
Sure.
We just don't have those conversations. We get news from where we want to get it, and we associate ourselves with people who think like us. And it's not good for civil society. And a researcher 30 years ago could see that happening already.
No, I need to read that. I think I picked it up at the store one time. I saw a lot of charts and I very quickly put it down, but
Yeah, it's really long. Unless you have like a course on it, there's probably a Cliff Notes version that's better.
I'll tell you a good one that's short and hits on the same topics is called Tribe by Sebastian Junger. And it's about the loss of community and how humans are really wired to have purpose and have community. And without those, we kind of fall apart. And he talks about kind of the state we're in now for a lot of the same things you just mentioned. And it's only like 150 pages. So
that's good. That's right up my alley. Right
same
up my
here.
list.
I'll put links in the notes to that.
Okay.
When you're obviously deeply involved in the outdoors, do you have a favorite spot in the outdoors? And it could be in the West, it could be on the East Coast. I'm from the East Coast, so I've got a lot of favorite spots there. Anywhere come to mind as your favorite place to be outdoors?
Yeah, I grew up in the Adirondacks. I think that's my place. I know people from the West poo-poo it because it's like, well, it's a state park, but it's bigger than like 5 Western national parks put together, Yosemite, Yellowstone, Glacier.
Oh, wow.
It's huge. It's the biggest park in the country, and there's wilderness and, it's got everything. And the high peaks, I'm trying to become a 46er, which is hiking all the high peaks. There's 46 peaks over 5,000 feet.
Nice.
Are not 14ers, which I've also done a couple of out West, but what's really interesting is you pretty much start at zero. So when I started my first, I think it was a 13er, we started at like 11,000 feet or something. I'm like, what is this? We're already here. So I have some good East Coast outdoor pride. And I think it's pretty cool that you're actually hiking from the bottom to the top of a mountain when you're doing the peaks in the Adirondacks. But it's a super special place. And one, we go back 2 or 3 times a year to try to tick off more and more peaks, but it's becoming harder as other things kind of get in the way. But someday I'll get there. I'm doing it with my dad. I don't know if he's going to get there, but I'll get there.
That's great. That's so cool. Final question. So the people that listen to this podcast, they love the American West for one reason or another. And it could be through conservation, could be through outdoor recreation, could be through art, could be through just reading about it from a different country. But knowing everything with your experiences there in the trenches in DC, making things happen, for making the country better through your hard work, do you have any kind of parting words of wisdom that you could leave for the listeners of this podcast?
Well, I guess for career-wise, because we talked a little bit about that, I like the dare to prepare motto, but I think it goes for everything, especially being outside. I just like to be more prepared than not, and I prepare for everything, and it's been really helpful. It's amazing if you over prepare for an interview or for a hearing or for anything. You might go back and say I wasted 4 hours because I didn't need all that information, but you will always fare better. And I think the same for kind of outdoor adventures, or when I'm planning my trips out West. Certainly I've spent a lot of time out West, and the most fruitful and I think best experiences have been the ones that I have over prepared for. So I use that in my motto, in my kind of daily motto and my life motto. And my husband gave me a book, Dare to Prepare, before my interview for this job, which I was probably the youngest candidate, maybe the most least qualified, with years of experience, and got this role, I think, because I was probably the most prepared. So I guess that would be my final thought.
I love that. Well, Jess, you're awesome. This was really fun. And like I
Thank
said,
you. Thanks for your time.
yeah, I'm in a much better mood. Thank you very much. And
Good.
I imagine everybody listening is too, but I really appreciate it and keep up the great work.
Thank you. Awesome. Have a good one.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, and or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.